Jake was having the worst camping trip of his life. 3 days into what was supposed to be a peaceful photography expedition in the Oregon wilderness, his camera had broken, his tent had leaked, and he managed to eat something that disagreed with him completely. Now he was trudging through the forest at midnight, trying to get back to his truck parked miles away at the trailhead. The strange lights in the sky started around 11 p.m. At first, Jake thought they might be helicopters or maybe some kind of military exercise. Living near Portland, he'd seen plenty of weird aircraft testing over the years. But these lights moved differently. They danced and weaved through the air like they were chasing something. Or maybe something was chasing them. Then came the sound, a deep rumbling that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet, followed by what could only be described as the world's largest tree falling down. The crash echoed through the valley, sending birds flying in every direction and making Jake's ears ring, against every survival instinct screaming at him to run the other way. Jake found himself hiking toward the source of the noise. His photographer's curiosity had always gotten him into trouble, and tonight would be no different. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and his backup camera, he pushed through thick underbrush and over fallen logs, following a trail of broken branches and scattered debris. The crash site was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A silvery craft, roughly the size of a city bus but shaped like a teardrop, had carved a deep groove through the hillside before coming to rest against a cluster of ancient pine trees. The metal hull gleamed with an oily rainbow sheen that seemed to shift colors in his flashlight beam. Strange symbols covered its surface, and sections of it were clearly damaged, with jagged holes torn in what looked like impossibly strong material. Jake was still trying to process what he was looking at when the hatch opened. She emerged like something from a fever dream, 7 feet tall and built like an athlete, with smooth blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the darkness. Her hair was silver white and fell to her shoulders in waves that caught the moonlight, but it was her eyes that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Gold and amber, like a wolf's, but with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. She moved despite what were obviously serious injuries. Dark fluid that might have been blood seeped from cuts along her arms and side. Her left leg seemed to favor her weight, and she held one arm closer to her body than the other. Yet even wounded, she carried herself with the fluid grace of a natural predator. The first sounds she made were nothing like any language Jake had ever heard. Clicks and whistles that seemed to come from deep in her throat, mixed with harmonics that made his teeth ache. She was looking directly at him while she spoke, her head tilted at an angle that reminded him uncomfortably of a hawk studying a mouse. Then something around her neck began to glow softly, and her voice changed. "Small creature," she said, the words strangely accented but perfectly clear. "You hunt in darkness. You carry detection tools." Jake looked down at his camera and flashlight, then back up at her. "I'm sorry." "What?" She took a step closer, and Jake noticed she was favoring that injured leg more than he'd initially thought. "Your scent carries traces of many animals. You track prey through their territory. You're a hunter." "Yes, I'm a photographer," Jake said slowly, holding up his camera. "I take pictures of animals. Not hunt them." The alien woman made a sound. That might have been amusement. Her golden eyes swept over him from head to toe, taking in his hiking boots, his backpack, his general human smallness compared to her impressive height. "Adorable little hunter," she said, and there was something almost fond in her voice. "You are injured." "Me? No. I'm fine. But you're bleeding." She glanced down at her wounds with the casual indifference of someone checking a minor scrape. "Surface damage will heal." Her eyes fixed on him again. "You offer assistance to a known creature?" Jake found himself nodding before he'd really thought it through. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles from here. Basic first aid supplies, warm place to rest. I mean, if you need help." Something shifted in her expression. The predatory intensity softened slightly, replaced by what looked like surprised curiosity. "You would bring dangerous strangers to your den. Are you dangerous?" Jake asked, then immediately realized how stupid that question was. Everything about her screamed apex predator, from the way she held herself to the casual confidence in her voice. She made that amused sound again. To you? No, small hunter. You are. She seemed to search for the right word. Precious, fragile thing that should be protected. The way she said it made Jake feel like he was being evaluated as potential prey, and simultaneously dismissed as too small to bother with. It should have been insulting. But there was something almost affectionate in her tone. I'm Jake, he said, extending his hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of greeting. She looked at his outstretched hand with fascination, then carefully took it in her much larger one. Her skin was warm and slightly textured, like very fine sandpaper. Her grip was gentle, but Jake could feel the incredible strength behind it. I am Zara of the Hunting Cast, tracker of the Stellar Concordance. She released his hand and straightened to her full impressive. Hide, I accept your offer of den sharing, small Jake. The 2-mile hike back to his cabin took nearly 3 hours. Zara moved carefully through the forest, her enhanced senses constantly scanning for threats Jake couldn't even imagine. She paused, frequently to examine broken twigs or disturbed earth, her golden eyes reflecting his flashlight beam like an animal's. Twice she stopped him with a raised hand and stood perfectly still, listening to sounds he couldn't hear. During one of these pauses, she moved to position herself between Jake and whatever had caught her attention, her whole body radiating protective alertness. What is it? He whispered during the second stop. Nothing that hunts you tonight, she replied quietly. But many things that could. When they finally reached his small log cabin, Zara examined it with the same thorough attention she'd given the forest. She walked the perimeter, tested the door and windows, and made several observations about what she called defensive inadequacies. Then as many weak points, she informed him as he unlocked the front door. Windows provide light, but also entry for enemies. Single exit is tactical error. It's just a vacation rental, Jake said, flipping on the lights. I don't usually worry about tactical advantages. Zara stepped inside and immediately began what could only be described as a security assessment. She checked sight lines, tested the stability of furniture, and examined his kitchen knives with professional interest. These are adequate for close combat, she said, holding up his chef's knife and testing its balance. Primitive but effective. Jake watched in fascination as she rearranged his living space according to some alien logic he couldn't follow. The knives went into a wooden block she placed near the front door. His small dining table got moved to provide a clear view of all the windows. Even his coffee maker was repositioned to what she apparently considered a more defensible location. You live alone always? She asked as she systematically inspected every corner of the cabin. Most of the time, yeah. I travel a lot for work. No pack, no mate? Her golden eyes fixed on him with what looked like concern. How do you survive without protection? Jake wasn't sure how to explain modern human society to an alien warrior, who apparently came from a culture where traveling alone was suicidal. We don't really have packs, and I can take care of myself pretty well. Zara made a sound that was clearly skeptical. She'd finished her inspection and was now looking at him, the way someone might look at a lost puppy found wandering in traffic. You're a brave little creature, she said finally, but very fragile, very alone. There was something in her voice that made Jake's chest tighten unexpectedly. Not pity, exactly, but a kind of protective concern that he hadn't heard directed at him in years. I'm fine, he said. Though the words came out less convincing than he'd intended, Zara tilted her head in that bird-like way again, studying him with those impossibly golden eyes. Yes, she said softly, you will be, and somehow, despite the complete impossibility of his situation, Jake found himself believing her. Jake woke up the next morning to find his coffee maker had been moved 3 feet to the left. He stared at it for a long moment, wondering if he'd imagined the entire previous night. Then he heard the sound of running water from his bathroom, and remembered that he now had a 7-foot alien house guest, who treated his cabin like a military outpost. Zara emerged from the bathroom looking considerably better than she had the night before. Her injuries had healed at a rate that would have impressed any human doctor, leaving only faint silver lines where deep cuts had been. She'd somehow managed to clean her strange clothing, and her silver hair was braided back in an intricate pattern that probably meant something in her culture. "Good morning, small Jake," she said, settling into what had apparently become her preferred spot near the window, where she could see the entire room and both exits. "Morning," Jake replied, trying to process the surreal nature of having casual conversation with an alien over breakfast. "How are you feeling?" Recovery proceeds adequately. She watched him move around the kitchen with the focused attention of a scientist, studying an interesting specimen. "Your morning rituals are curious. You consume heated plant liquid before other sustenance." Jake paused with his coffee mug halfway to his lips. "It's coffee. Helps me wake up." "Stimulant dependency," Zara observed with what sounded like concern. "Your species requires chemical assistance for basic alertness?" "It's not dependency. It's preference," Jake said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Do you want some?" Zara's golden eyes narrowed as she studied the dark liquid in his mug. Without warning, she leaned forward and sniffed deeply, then made a face that suggested she'd encountered something mildly toxic. "Bitter, acrid, contains compounds that would accelerate heart function." She looked at him with what could only be described as disapproval. "This beverage is not suitable for small creatures." Before Jake could protest, Zara had taken the mug from his hands and moved it to what she apparently considered a safe distance. "I need that to function properly," Jake said, reaching for his coffee. "No." Zara's tone was gentle but absolutely firm. "Stimulants are harmful to fragile systems. You will adapt to natural wakefulness." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Did you just confiscate my coffee?" "Protected," Zara corrected. "Small hunters require careful dietary management over the next few days." Jake learned that Zara's idea of careful dietary management extended to pretty much everything he put in his mouth. She tasted his food before allowing him to eat it, checking for what she called toxins and contamination. She replaced his breakfast cereal with nuts and berries she gathered from the forest. She even started hunting, bringing back rabbits and fish that she'd caught with her bare hands. "Your packaged foods contain many chemicals," she explained as she prepared a rabbit she'd caught that morning. "Preservatives, artificial flavors, compounds that serve no nutritional purpose, not suitable for precious small hunter." Jake watched in fascination as she worked. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning and preparing the meat with tools she'd improvised from his kitchen supplies. Everything about her movements spoke of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. "Where I come from, we don't usually catch our own dinner," Jake said. "How do you obtain fresh meat?" "Grocery stores, restaurants." Zara paused in her work to look at him with an expression of deep concern. "Other creatures hunt for you? You depend on strangers for survival." "It's not like that. We have systems. Agriculture, supply chains. You are completely helpless." Zara concluded with what sounded like genuine worry. "Cannot hunt, cannot identify safe foods, cannot defend territory. How has your species survived?" Jake wasn't sure how to explain modern civilization to someone whose culture apparently valued individual survival skills above everything else. "We work together. Specialization. Some people grow food, others prepare it, others do different jobs. Pack cooperation." Zara nodded approvingly. "But what happens when pack fails? When systems break down? I guess we'd figure it out." Zara made a sound that suggested she had serious doubts about Jake's ability to figure it out. Without help, that afternoon, Jake discovered another aspect of Zara's protective nature when he decided to take a walk around the property. He barely made it 50 feet from the cabin when Zara appeared beside him, moving with that silent grace that still startled him. "Where does small hunter travel?" she asked, falling into step beside him. "Just walking around, getting some fresh air." "Unescorted movement in unfamiliar territory is dangerous," Zara observed, her golden eyes constantly scanning the surrounding forest. "Many predators hunt during daylight hours." Jake looked around at the peaceful Oregon woodland he'd been exploring for years. "There's nothing dangerous out here. Maybe some black bears, but they usually avoid people." "Bears?" Zara's attention sharpened immediately. "Large carnivorous mammals? What is typical size and aggression level?" They're not really aggressive unless you surprise them or get between a mother and her cubs. Mostly they just want to be left alone. Zara made a thoughtful clicking sound. Still potential threat to small hunter. I will accompany all outdoor activities. And just like that, Jake found himself with a constant companion who treated every woodland walk like a reconnaissance. Mission through hostile territory, Zara moved ahead of him. Checking for tracks and scent trails he couldn't detect, she steered him away from what she considered dangerous areas and made him stop frequently. While she listened for sounds that meant nothing to his human ears, "This is a nice spot," Jake said when they reached a small clearing with a view of the valley below. "Tactically disadvantageous," Zara replied immediately. "Multiple approach routes, limited escape options. Elevated position makes us visible to aerial threats. There are no aerial threats, unless you count the occasional helicopter." Zara gave him a look that suggested she was adding helicopters to her list of things to worry about. That night, Jake discovered that Zara's protective instincts extended to his sleeping arrangements. He'd been asleep for maybe an hour when he woke to find a considerable weight settling across his legs. Zara had positioned herself at the foot of his bed, lying crossways so that her body covered his lower half. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Sleepily, guarding sleep period," Zara replied matter-of-factly. "Small creatures are vulnerable during rest. Pack members maintain contact for protection. I've been sleeping alone for 30 years. I think I'll be okay." 30 years of inadequate protection, Zara corrected. "You were fortunate. But fortune does not last forever." Jake tried to move his legs, but Zara's weight kept them firmly pinned. "You're kind of heavy." Zara immediately shifted, redistributing her weight more evenly. Better. It was better, actually. Her alien physiology seemed to allow her to spread her mass in ways that made her presence comforting rather than crushing. Her body temperature was slightly higher than human normal, creating a warm, secure feeling that Jake hadn't experienced since childhood. "This is weird," he said, but without much conviction. "Pack bonding is essential for survival," Zara replied. Sleepily, small hunters especially require security during vulnerable periods. The next morning, Jake woke to find Zara still positioned across his legs. But now she was awake and alert, her golden eyes scanning the room systematically. When she noticed he was conscious, she made a soft rumbling sound that he was beginning to recognize as contentment. "Good morning, little hunter," she said, beginning her careful extraction from the bed. Sleep quality was adequate. Jake had to admit he'd slept better than he had in months. "Yeah, actually, thanks." Zara's expression brightened noticeably. "Pack sleeping arrangements are beneficial for all members. Tonight we will repeat protocol." And just like that, Jake found himself accepting that he now had a 7-foot alien roommate who considered him her personal responsibility and apparently intended to sleep on top of him for the foreseeable future. The gift-giving started on the third day. Jake woke up to find a perfectly arranged pile of smooth river stones on his bedside table. When he asked about them, Zara explained that she'd selected each one for its particular color and shape. "Aesthetic objects for den enhancement," she said proudly. "Small hunters appreciate visual stimulation." The next day it was wildflowers, carefully arranged in one of his coffee mugs since he didn't own a proper vase. Then interesting feathers she'd found during her morning patrol of the property. Each gift was presented with the same pride and care someone might show when bringing home something special for a beloved pet. Jake found himself oddly touched by the gesture, even as he struggled with the implications of being treated like someone's cherished animal. There was something purely innocent about Zara's joy when he admired her offerings, something that made his chest feel warm in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. By the end of the week, Jake's entire routine had been reorganized according to alien logic he was only beginning to understand. Morning health checks had become standard. Zara would examine his eyes, check his temperature, and make sure he was drinking enough water. If she detected anything she considered suboptimal, adjustments would be made immediately. The strange thing was how natural it all began to feel, having someone anticipate his needs, worry about his well-being, and treat his comfort as a Jake woke up the 8th morning to the sound of Zara making what could only be described as alarm-clicking noises. She was crouched by the window, her entire body rigid with attention, staring out at the forest with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "What is it?" he whispered, automatically keeping his voice low. "Something wrong in the woods." Zara replied without taking her eyes off the tree line. "Animals have gone silent. Scent trails are disturbed." Jake joined her at the window, trying to see whatever had caught her attention. The forest looked normal to him, but he learned to trust Zara's enhanced senses over his own limited human perception. "Dangerous?" he asked. Zara's golden eyes flicked to him briefly, and he saw something there he hadn't seen before. Not just alertness, but genuine concern, maybe even fear. "Very," she said simply. The transformation in Zara's behavior was immediate and complete. The relaxed, protective roommate he'd grown accustomed to was replaced by a focused predator operating in full tactical mode. She moved through the cabin with silent efficiency, checking and rechecking every possible entry point. Her casual clothes were replaced by what looked like form-fitting armor she'd retrieved from her crashed ship. "The creature I was hunting," she explained as she methodically inspected weapons that seemed to materialize from nowhere. "It has found us." "What creature?" Zara paused in her weapon check to look at him seriously. "Void Stalker. Class 9 extinction. Threat. It feeds on fear and adrenaline, making your species ideal prey. My mission is to eliminate it before it can establish a breeding population on your world." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Breeding population, if successful. Offspring will spread across your planet like plague. Your species would be extinct within one solar cycle." The casual way she delivered this information made it somehow more terrifying. Zara wasn't trying to scare him. She was simply stating facts as she understood them. "So you're not just a hunter," Jake said. "You're trying to save Earth." "I am trying to complete mission," Zara corrected. Protecting small hunter became complication. The way she said it suggested that her priorities might have shifted somewhat over the past week, and that this shift was causing her some internal conflict over the next few hours. Jake watched Zara prepare for what was clearly going to be a significant battle. She set up what looked like scanning equipment around the perimeter of the cabin, devices that hummed with barely audible energy and cast strange shadows in the corners of rooms. She tested weapons that seemed to respond to her touch, glowing softly when she handled them. "These detection systems will alert us to approach," she explained as she calibrated a device that looked like a metallic flower. "Void Stalker cannot mask all signatures simultaneously. When it gets close enough to attack, we will know." Jake asked. Zara's expression became very serious. "Small hunter will remain in secure location during combat. This is not negotiable." "I could help," Jake protested. "I know these woods better than you do. Knowledge of terrain is valuable," Zara acknowledged. "But Void Stalker is not ordinary predator. It manipulates perception, creates illusions, feeds on terror, bringing precious pack member into combat." Zone would be she searched for the right word. "Unacceptable." Jake wanted to argue, but the look in Zara's golden eyes stopped him. This wasn't the gentle protectiveness he'd grown used to. This was the absolute authority of someone who'd spent her life making life-and-death tactical decisions. For the next 2 days, they barely left the cabin. Zara maintained constant vigilance, her enhanced senses monitoring threats Jake couldn't detect. She slept in short intervals, always keeping one hand on a weapon and positioning herself between Jake and whatever direction she considered most dangerous. The waiting was the worst part. Jake tried to help by monitoring the scanning equipment, but most of the readings meant nothing to him. Zara would glance at the displays and immediately understand whether they indicated normal forest activity or something more sinister. "It's testing our defenses," she explained during one of her brief rest periods. "Probing for weaknesses, learning our patterns. Very intelligent predator." "How long does this usually take?" "Every hunt is different," Zara replied. "But Void Stalkers are patient. It may observe for days before attempting direct approach." Jake found himself studying Zara during these quiet moments, noticing details he'd missed before. The way she never completely relaxed, even when sitting still. the unconscious way she positioned herself to keep him in her peripheral vision. The fact that she'd been testing his food and water more thoroughly, apparently concerned that the creature might try to poison their supplies. "Are you scared?" he asked during one particularly tense evening. Zara considered the question seriously. "Not scared, concerned. This creature is more dangerous than most I have hunted, and I have." She paused, seeming to struggle with the concept she wanted to express. "Additional motivations for ensuring successful outcome. Because of your mission to protect Earth. Because of my need to protect small Hunter," Zara corrected quietly. The admission hung in the air between them, and Jake realized that Zara's emotional investment in keeping him safe might actually be compromising her ability to do her job effectively. On the third night, the scanning equipment began registering something. Zara was on her feet instantly, weapons in hand, her entire body radiating lethal readiness. "It approaches," she said quietly. "Jake, you must go to interior room with no windows. Locked door. Do not emerge until I return." "What if you don't return?" Zara's expression softened slightly. "Then you must take your vehicle and drive to populated area. Warn others. Do not trust anyone who claims to be me unless they can prove identity." "How?" "Ask what I call you when you are being stubborn." Jake thought for a moment. "Precious small Hunter." "Wrong. Think harder." Jake ran through their conversations, trying to remember. Then it came to him, the gentle, fond way she said it when she was mildly exasperated with his attempts at independence. "Foolish little Hunter," he said. Zara smiled, the expression both fierce and affectionate. "Correct. Now go." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to insist that they face this threat together. But looking at Zara in full warrior mode, he realized that his presence would only distract her from the job she'd trained her entire life to do. "Come back to me," he said instead. "Always," Zara replied, and Jake heard both a promise and a prayer in that single word. He went to the cabin's small back bedroom and locked the door, then positioned himself where he could hear what was happening outside. The waiting began again, but this time it was different. This time, Zara was out there alone, facing something that could end both their lives. The first sign of trouble came about an hour later. Jake heard Zara's voice calling his name from outside the cabin, but something about it didn't sound right. "Jake? The threat is eliminated. You may open the door now." Jake approached the bedroom door but didn't unlock it. Something about the tone seemed off, though he couldn't put his finger on what. "What do you call me when I'm being stubborn?" he called. "Out, precious small Hunter," came the immediate reply. Jake's blood turned to ice. That was the wrong answer. The real Zara had just finished explaining that precious small Hunter was incorrect. She called him foolish little Hunter when he was being stubborn. Whatever was outside wasn't Zara. "Jake, please open the door," the fake voice continued. And now he could hear subtle differences in the accent, small variations in pronunciation that the real Zara never made. "I am injured and require assistance." The manipulation was clever, using his protective instincts against him, trying to make him worry enough about Zara's well-being that he'd ignore his better judgment. But Jake had spent enough time with the real Zara to know she would never admit to being hurt in a way that made her seem weak or vulnerable. He backed away from the door, his heart hammering in his chest. The fake voice grew more insistent, then desperate, pleading with him to let her inside. At one point, it even mimicked crying, which was something Jake had never heard from the real Zara and doubted she was physically capable of. Something scratched at the bedroom door, long, deliberate scrapes that sounded like claws dragging across wood. The sound made Jake's skin crawl, but he forced himself to stay quiet and hidden. Then he heard something that made his heart stop. The real Zara's voice, distant but unmistakable, calling out in her own language somewhere in the forest. The clicking, whistling sounds echoed through the trees, and Jake realized she was either communicating with something or issuing some kind of challenge. The fake voice at his door stopped abruptly. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. Through the small bedroom window, he caught glimpses of movement in the darkness, flashes of light that might have been energy weapons, the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush, and occasionally brief glimpses of Zara's silver hair as she moved with impossible speed through the trees. The fight seemed to rage for hours, moving through the forest like a deadly storm. Jake could hear the real Zara's voice occasionally, usually followed by sounds that definitely weren't coming from anything remotely human or natural. At one point, something slammed into the side of the cabin hard enough to shake the entire structure. Jake pressed himself against the far wall of the bedroom, wondering if whatever was. Jake helped Zara to the couch, noticing how she moved more carefully than usual. The confident, fluid grace he'd grown accustomed to was replaced by the deliberate movements of someone trying not to show how much they were hurting. "Let me see those cuts," he said, reaching for the first aid kit he'd learned to keep easily accessible since Zara's arrival. "Wounds are minor," Zara protested, but she didn't resist when Jake began examining the damage. "Healing will proceed naturally." Jake wasn't so sure about that. While her previous injuries had healed with remarkable speed, these looked different, deeper. Some of them had an odd, dark discoloration around the edges that made him worry about infection or poison. "What exactly was that thing?" he asked as he carefully cleaned a particularly nasty gash on her arm. "Void Stalker," Zara replied, wincing slightly as Jake worked. "Interdimensional predator. Feeds on fear and adrenaline by creating terror in prey species. Your planet's abundance of intelligent life makes it attractive hunting ground." Jake paused. "In his work, interdimensional, like from another dimension, correct, exists partially outside normal space, which makes detection difficult. Can phase in and out of visible spectrum, manipulate local reality to create illusions." Zara's golden eyes met his. "Very dangerous opponent, but you beat it eventually." Zara was quiet for a moment. Battle was more difficult than anticipated. Creature had adapted to Earth environment more than initial assessment suggested. As Jake continued treating her wounds, Zara began explaining what had happened during the fight. The Void Stalker had been cleverer than expected, using the local terrain and wildlife to its advantage. It had created multiple false versions of itself, forcing Zara to waste time and energy distinguishing between illusions and the real threat. "Mimicking your voice was particularly effective strategy," Zara admitted. "Used emotional attachment against tactical judgment." "What do you mean?" "When creature replicated your voice calling for help, required significant mental discipline to recognize deception. Protective instincts conflicted with logical assessment." Jake realized what she was saying. "You almost fell for it too." "Yes." Zara looked almost embarrassed. Emotional investment in small Huntress safety created tactical vulnerability. "Professional failing." "It's not a failing," Jake said firmly. "It's called caring about someone." Zara tilted her head in that curious way she had when processing unfamiliar concepts. "Caring creates weakness in combat situations, maybe, but it also creates strength. You fought harder because you had something to protect." "Possible interpretation," Zara conceded, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. Over the next few days, Jake got to see a different side of Zara as she recovered from the battle. The invincible alien warrior he'd grown used to was temporarily replaced by someone who needed care and attention. She slept more deeply, ate more frequently, and actually allowed Jake to fuss over her without protest. "You should rest," Jake said when he found her trying to repair her damaged equipment on the second day after the fight. "Repairs are necessary," Zara replied, but her movements were slower than usual, and Jake could see the exhaustion in her posture. "The repairs can wait. You need to heal." To his surprise, Zara didn't argue. She set aside her tools and allowed Jake to guide her back to bed, where she curled up with the trusting vulnerability of someone who felt completely safe. Jake found himself enjoying the role reversal. After a week of being the one who was constantly protected and cared for, it felt good to be the one doing the protecting for a change. He brought Zara meals, monitored her healing progress, and made sure she got the rest she needed. "Small Hunter is attentive caregiver," Zara observed on the third day, accepting a cup of herbal tea Jake had prepared from plants she'd identified as beneficial for healing. "I learned from the best," Jake replied. "Someone taught me that pack members take care of each other." Zara's expression softened. Pack loyalty is reciprocal arrangement. Exactly. It was during this recovery period that Jake began to understand just how much his life had changed. When his phone finally got signal and started buzzing with missed calls and messages from work, he found himself reluctant to even check them. The outside world seemed distant and unimportant compared to making sure Zara had everything she needed. Your communication device summons attention, Zara observed. Noting his ringtone, just work stuff, Jake said, declining yet another call. From his editor, nothing important. Employment obligations are not important. Jake looked at Zara, noting the genuine curiosity in her golden eyes. Not as important as making sure you're okay. Small Hunter would neglect pack responsibilities for injured pack member. Without hesitation, Zara made that rumbling sound of contentment, and Jake realized he'd just passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. As Zara's strength returned, so did her protective instincts. By the fourth day, she was back to monitoring his food intake and sleep patterns, though with an added gentleness that hadn't been there before. She seemed more aware of his emotional state, more attentive to subtle signs of stress or discomfort. Battle created additional understanding. She explained. When Jake commented on her increased attentiveness, realized how precious Small Hunter truly is. I'm not that fragile, Jake protested mildly. Not fragile, Zara corrected. Precious. Irreplaceable. Worth protecting at any cost. The way she said it made Jake's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. There was something in her voice that went beyond simple protectiveness or pack loyalty. That evening, as they settled into their usual sleeping arrangement, Zara positioned herself more carefully than usual, distributing her weight so that Jake felt completely secure without being restricted. Question for Small Hunter, she said quietly in the darkness. Yeah? When I was fighting Void Stalker, you could have attempted escape. Vehicle was accessible. Route to populated areas was available. Why did you remain? Jake considered the question. Because you told me to stay. Instructions could have been ignored. Self-preservation might have suggested alternative course of action. I wasn't going to leave you to fight that thing alone, even though presence was requested for safety purposes, especially because of that. Jake turned his head to look at her in the dim light. You spent the last week making sure I was safe and cared for. Did you really think I'd abandon you when you needed support? Zara was quiet for a long moment. Pack loyalty runs deeper than anticipated. It's not just pack loyalty, Jake said softly. What else? Jake hesitated, then decided. To be honest, I care about you, Zara. Not just as someone who protects me, but as you, as individual entity rather than functional provider, as someone I've grown to love. The words hung in the air between them. Jake immediately wondered if he'd said too much, if the concept of love was something Zara's species understood or valued. Love. Zara repeated slowly, testing the word. Emotional attachment that transcends practical benefit. Something like that. Interesting concept. Zara shifted slightly, her arms tightening around him in what could only be described as a hug. Small Hunter's emotional investment is reciprocated. Jake smiled in the darkness. Good to know. Jake, yeah, thank you for remaining during dangerous period. Your presence provided strength during difficult battle. Thank you for coming. Back to me. Always, Zara replied, and Jake heard the promise in that single word, outside. The forest had returned to its normal nighttime sounds. As the local wildlife slowly reclaimed territory that had been temporarily made uninhabitable by the Void Stalker's presence. Inside the cabin, wrapped in the protective embrace of his alien Huntress, Jake had never felt more safe or more loved. Tomorrow would bring questions about what came next, about whether Zara would be called back to her duties among the stars, or whether she could stay on Earth. But tonight, holding each other in the warm darkness, those concerns seemed manageable. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Jake woke up the next morning to find Zara already awake, staring at a device that hadn't been there the night before. It was small and crystalline, pulsing with soft blue light, and it was making a sound he'd never heard from any of her other equipment, a melodic chimming that seemed almost musical. Communication array, Zara explained when she noticed his attention. Emergency beacon. My people have located crash site. Jake felt his heart sink. They're coming to get you? Extraction team will arrive within 3 solar rotations. Zara confirmed, her voice carefully neutral. Mission parameters require return to command vessel for debriefing and reassignment. 3 days. Jake had 3 days before Zara would leave Earth forever, returning to whatever stellar civilization had sent her here in the first place. When do you have to go? He asked, trying to keep his own voice as neutral as hers. Departure is scheduled. Upon team arrival, Zara set the device aside and turned to face him fully. There are considerations. What kind of considerations? Zara was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes studying his face with that familiar intensity. Standard protocol requires immediate extraction upon mission completion. No exceptions for personal attachments or emotional complications. But circumstances were not standard. Zara's expression became thoughtful. Void Stalker was more dangerous than initial assessment. Required local assistance for successful elimination. Tactical partnership with indigenous life form proved essential. Jake realized what she was getting at. You're thinking of staying. Considering. Possibility, Zara corrected carefully. Earth has other potential threats. Continued monitoring might be advisable. Over the next 2 days, Jake watched Zara wrestle with a decision that was clearly tearing her apart. Her sense of duty warred with her growing attachment to Earth and to him. She would spend hours staring at the communication device, then put it away and focus determinedly on their daily routines. Tell me about your people, Jake said on the second day, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset over the valley. Stellar Concordance. Zara replied, Alliance of species dedicated to maintaining galactic stability. Hunters, like myself, are assigned to eliminate threats that could destabilize entire star systems. Sounds like important work, essential work, Zara agreed. Without intervention, dangerous species spread unchecked, civilizations fall, entire planets become uninhabitable. And you've been doing this for how long? 17 cycles. Since maturity assessment deemed me suitable for hunter training. Jake tried to imagine what that life must have been like. 17 years of traveling between worlds, facing deadly creatures, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections. Do you have friends among your people? Family? Zara considered the question. Operational partnerships, shared experiences with other hunters, but nothing resembling human social bonds. That sounds lonely. Loneliness was not a concept I understood before Earth assignment, Zara admitted. Now isolation seems less acceptable. That night, as they lay in their usual configuration, Zara was quieter than normal. Jake could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself like someone preparing for a difficult goodbye. What happens if you stay? He asked quietly. Violation of direct orders, abandonment of post. Likely classification as rogue operative. That sounds bad. Very bad, Zara confirmed. Would become target for other hunters, unable to return to concordant space. Essentially exiled. And if you go, return to normal assignment rotation. New worlds, new threats. New missions, new partners, no partners, Zara said softly. Human concepts of partnership do not translate to concordance culture. Jake understood. What she wasn't saying, if she left, she would go back to a life of isolation and duty. While if she stayed, she would become a fugitive from her own people. I can't ask you to give up everything for me, Jake said finally. You are not asking. I am choosing. On the third morning, Jake woke to the sound of aircraft approaching. Through the window, he could see lights in the sky that moved with the same unnatural grace as Zara's crashed ship had. Her extraction team had arrived. Zara was already up and dressed in what looked like formal armor, more elaborate and ceremonial than her usual combat gear. She stood at the window watching the approaching vessels. With an expression Jake couldn't read, time to go. He asked, time to decide, Zara corrected. The landing was almost silent. 3 sleek craft touched down in the clearing behind the cabin, and Jake watched through the window as figures emerged. They were clearly of Zara's species, tall, graceful, and moving with that same predatory confidence. But there was something cold about them that Zara lacked, a professional distance that reminded Jake uncomfortably of soldiers. Hunter Zara. Came a voice from outside, speaking in Zara's language, but somehow managing to sound formal and disapproving even through the universal translator. Report for extraction. Zara looked at Jake one last time, her golden eyes searching his face as if memorizing every detail. What are you going to tell them? Jake asked. Truth, Zara replied simply. She walked outside to meet her people, and Jake followed at a respectful distance, staying close enough to hear, but far enough away to avoid seeming like a threat. The leader of the extraction team was a female even taller than Zara, with silver hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. She looked at Zara with the disappointed expression of a superior officer dealing with a subordinate who had developed inconvenient complications. Mission status. The leader asked in accented English, apparently for Jake's benefit. Void Stalker. Eliminated, Zara reported. Threat to indigenous population neutralized. Acceptable. Prepare for immediate departure. Request permission to file supplementary report, Zara said formally. The leader's expression became more disapproving. Speak, Earth requires continued monitoring. Void Stalker presence indicates vulnerability to interdimensional incursions. Recommend permanent observation post. Unnecessary. Threat assessment does not support ongoing resource allocation. Assessment may be incomplete. Zara persisted. Local assistance proved essential for mission success. Indigenous life form demonstrated tactical value. The leader's cold gaze shifted to Jake, studying him like a specimen. Human proved useful? Human proved essential, Zara corrected firmly. Interesting. The leader walked over to Jake, circling him slowly while he tried not to feel like prey being evaluated by a predator. Small, fragile, limited sensory capability. What possible value could such a creature provide? Adaptability, Zara said. Pattern recognition, intuitive threat assessment, resistance to mental manipulation, and emotional attachment, the leader added with obvious distaste, which compromises judgment and operational efficiency, which provides motivation and tactical advantage, Zara countered. The leader stopped her examination of Jake and turned back to Zara. You request extended assignment. I request permission to establish monitoring station with local liaison. Local liaison, the leader repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of that idea. Hunter Zara, you have served with distinction for 17 cycles. Do not compromise exemplary record with emotional irrationality. My record speaks to my competence, Zara replied calmly. My request speaks to tactical necessity. The two aliens stared at each other for a long moment, engaged in some kind of silent battle of wills. Finally, the leader made a sound that might have been disgust. Request denied. Prepare for immediate departure. Then I formally resign my commission, Zara said quietly. The change in the leader's expression was immediate and dramatic. Unacceptable. Hunters do not resign. Hunters serve until reassignment or death. Then consider this reassignment. Zara replied, to Permanent Earth Monitoring Station. Population 2. Hunter Zara, the leader's voice took on a warning tone. Reconsider this course of action. Resignation means exile. No return to conquered space. No support from Hunter Command. You would become rogue operative. I understand consequences. Zara said firmly. For what? For small, fragile creature with lifespan of mere decades? Zara looked at Jake, and he saw something in her golden eyes that made his chest tight with emotion. For home, she said simply. The leader followed Zara's gaze to Jake, and for a moment, her cold expression softened slightly. I see, she was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Hunter Zara, your service record grants you consideration. Take one rotation to reconsider. We will return. Unnecessary, Zara replied. Decision is final. Take the time anyway, the leader said, her tone gentler than before. Some choices cannot be undone. After the extraction team departed, Jake and Zara stood in the clearing watching the lights disappear into the morning sky. So, Jake said finally, you're officially unemployed, officially exiled. Zara corrected. But yes, Unemployed. Any regrets? Zara turned to face him, her expression soft and certain. None. Small Hunter has become most important mission. Just so you know, Jake said. Stepping closer to her, you'll always have a job here. Professional alien huntress and full-time. Protector of foolish little hunters. Acceptable terms, Zara replied solemnly. The position also includes responsibilities for pack member emotional well-being and temperature regulation during sleep periods. I was hoping you'd say that, Zara smiled and pulled him into a hug that lifted his feet off the ground.